My first video of 2025 was on the Biosanctic Brood Surge, and many things have changed in the last year for the Genestealer Cult and the way the Biosanctic Brood Surge is seen and played. We now have the final version of Cult Ambush that should see us through to the end of the edition. Then it might change again. And this video on the Biosanctic Brood Surge is part of the January playlist, and the detachment videos will be available in a playlist for you, so however you want to play, there's a detachment and video for you. For its theme, the Biosanctic Brood Surge has become the most popular detachment, its theme being Muscle Beach. Tournament players use it a lot more now after the host of Ascension went underground, and more normal people who want to play a wargame over competing in a competition also like the Biosanctic Brood Surge. It's a fun detachment, it has a clear theme, but can fall into the problem of too narrow a focus on too few units, when the Genestealer Cult already have a small roster. The Biosanctic Brood Surge is not my style. I have tried it so many times, and I love Big Hammer Lady, as we call her, and Purestrains Genestealers, but a detachment that only really helps those parts is not how I like to play. I have had a lot of success with this detachment, which is the part I will be sharing with you today. How to play this detachment in 2026, even though it's not my theme. I will go through the nuances of the detachment rule that you may have missed, the enhancements I suggest, the stratagems you will use, the ones that you won't, and the tactics to play this army. The detachment rule is Hypermorphic Fury. You get to add 1 to charge rolls for Aberrants, Purestrains Genestealers, and any units led by a Biophagus. In addition, if you make a charge, you add 1 to the attack's characteristics of melee weapons equipped by models in the unit. An extra inch on a charge move for already fast Purestrains, that's totally fine, we also want it on the Aberrants. And it means that any unit coming from, no, not any unit, Purestrains or Aberrants coming from Deep Strike or Cult Ambush will have to roll an 8 to make a successful charge, rather than roll a 9 to get a successful charge. Using the Biophagus is the way we expand it to Metamorphs and Acolytes, and in theory Neophytes, but I don't see the benefit of attaching them to Neophytes. Lethal hits in combat, oh, and now you can get +1 to your charge and +1 attack. It's a weight of attacks, but they're not good attacks. If we want weight of attacks, we have Purestrains. So the Biophagus you attach to Metamorphs and or Acolytes. And because of how keywords work, where characters and units share all keywords, the Acolyte Biophagus unit is a Biophagus unit, and so they get the detachment bonus of +1 attack and +1 to the charge roll. And in reverse, the Patriarch and the Abominant will get the benefits of this detachment rule while they're in a Purestrain or Aberrant unit, but they wouldn't get it alone as then they lack the keywords. There are 4 enhancements in this detachment, as there are in like all the detachments, unless they're not called enhancements, they're just mandatory things that you have to take because you're an Imperial Assassin. But there are 2 good enhancements in this detachment, and 2 that you will only take to fill in the points. Predatory Instincts for an Abominant, Biophagus or Patriarch. Models in the Bearer's unit have Infiltrate, and once per battle round, you can do Heroic Intervention for free. The important part is that this is another unit that gains Infiltrate, so you can put it on an Abominant who joins Aberrants, and they will infiltrate alongside the Purestrains. Or have it on a Biophagus, and then add the Biophagus to whichever unit your opponent fears the most. Damage to Aberrants, lots of damage 1 attacks from Metamorph Claws and Hand Flamers. If the enemy only fears high damage attacks and has a lot of vehicles, Acolytes with damage 3 mining tools. The drawback of this idea is that then you will have 2 units without characters, which could be, in the case of Acolytes and Metamorphs, 2 units that don't have a Biophagus, so they don't get the benefit of the detachment rule or stratagems. That is fine. Have 1 of whatever that wasn't chosen in a truck, probably the Aberrants or Metamorphs, and the 3rd unit ends up running along where it can. Acolytes can mine objectives for command points on their way. Metamorphs can get up the board faster because without a character, they can scout. But that infiltrating unit can charge the enemy very quickly, and you also have Heroic Intervention to help other nearby infiltrating units if the enemy charged you. Heroic Intervention doesn't get the fight first charge bonus, but that is the charge bonus that you don't get. You still get +1 to the charge roll and +1 attack when you heroically intervene because it is still a charge move. The Biomorph adaptation is the other good enhancement. An Abominant or Patriarch only, you improve your armor penetration by 1 and your damage by 1 on your melee weapons. So you can have this on an Abominant, and they will be happy to get the extra armor penetration, but they already have random damage on their hammer. So it is either going to be just enough to do some damage and destroy an enemy model, or it's still not enough, or it's vastly overkill. Better to put this enhancement on the Patriarch to guarantee damage 3. With their 2+ hit roll, twin linked, which gives them the ability to reroll wound rolls and devastating wounds, then they are a reliable damage dealer. Then there are 2 little enhancements that you don't need and only take to fill in the last few points of your army. If points per weapon came back or points per model instead of locked points values for 5 or 10 models, then you would bypass these in favour of like 2 more neophytes. Mutagenic regeneration lets you regain a wound on a model in the unit. It doesn't let you return models to the unit. It only lets you regain lost wounds on models that are still in the unit. So it's only useful on units that have 2 or more wound models. That includes Purestrains, but that would mean you put this enhancement on the Patriarch and they really want the Biomorph adaptation. Each character can only have 1 enhancement. So it goes on an Abominant or Biophagus leading Aberrants. Maybe you'll get a wound back at some point. Perhaps 2 if you are really lucky. It triggers in each command phase, not each one of your command phases, so it is yours and your opponent. And it can be used to heal precision damage that hurt the character, and it doesn't need you to lead a unit, so this will keep working after the bodyguard is destroyed. Alien Majesty is the worst enhancement. An Abominant Biophagus or Patriarch, while the enemy unit is within engagement range of the bearer's unit, so not nearby, it has to be in engagement range, subtract 1 from the objective control characteristics of models in that enemy unit. But you reduce the enemy objective control to a minimum of 1. That is 1 per model. If they were objective control 1 anyway, as most units are, they are no worse off. If it was an objective control 4 vehicle, they would be reduced to objective control 3, but I think you will outscore them with your unit anyway. Or you can make troops, usually battle line troops that are objective control 2 into objective control 1, if you haven't killed them already. It's a really limited use, so I would not bother. Likewise, the stratagems. Some of them are useful, most of them are not. So let's go through them. Saintly Paroxysm. You die fighting, if you rolled a 2+. This is any Genestealer Cult character, and then they cause D3 mortal wounds. If they were the Patriarch or an Abominant, it is 2 D3 mortal wounds instead, if you roll at 2+. It also relies on the enemy killing you in combat. It does nothing if you die at range. And the Abominant can do it twice per game if she comes back with her regenerating gene mass rule. This stratagem triggers when you're destroyed. When you're destroyed is when you use regenerating gene mass, so you can use Saintly Paroxysm then, come back assuming you roll a 2+ on the regenerating gene mass, and then if you're taken down again, you can use Saintly Paroxysm again. How very holy and noble to die not once, but twice, and take down some enemies each time. But since any character could do it, if you need to cause the last few wounds on an enemy walker, for example, the Biophagus or even a Clamavus could do something useful. Gene Twisted Muscle is better. An Aberrant unit, a Biophagus unit, or a Purestrain unit gets to add 1 to their wound rolls when they make an attack against a monster or vehicle. That doesn't let the Patriarch's unit get devastating wounds on a 5+. Devastating wounds only applies to unmodified rolls. But because you have good armor penetration on the Aberrants and the Purestrains, which you can also boost with an extra +1 with the Ridge Runner and their Crossfire rule, now you also have the ability to get through their high toughness. Otherwise, we're normally wounding on a 5 or a 6. This is very useful in general, but for the biggest tank threats, I like to use Acolytes with Mining Tools. Their critical wounds are on a 4+, and that isn't changed to anti-vehicle 3+. But the tiny claws you have in the unit will wound on a 5+ instead of a 6+. If you did it in this unit, and if there was a Biophagus in the unit so you could do it. Normally you don't bother, because damage 3 does more than the damage 2 or damage 1 of the Purestrains. However, Acolytes with Mining Tools can't be everywhere. And even though they're damage 1, Purestrain Genestealers with enough attacks and bonuses to wound, and devastating wounds from the Patriarch will let you claw through much tougher enemies. If you ever needed +1 to wound against infantry, the Biophagus can provide that once per game. But other than in the final days hyper-adapted Raveners, this is all we have to fight monster keyword units. Monsters or vehicles. Evasive Vanguard has had a rework since the last time I talked about the Biosanctic Brood Surge. it is no longer locked to Purestrain units, and we're no longer shuffling a blip around a little bit. In any phase, when an enemy unit ends a move within 9 inches of one of your cult ambush markers, you can set up the cult ambush marker again. The best time to use it is in the enemy movement phase, when they are about to finish their movement and then have taken off the token. You can put it back on about 10 inches away where no other unit can reach it, and also out of line of sight, and then you can have a unit arrive basically immediately using cult ambush. This is like rapid ingress for one command point, because you can't use rapid ingress on units that are in cult ambush. Put the unit out of line of sight and enemies cannot shoot you. If they were a combat army, or a very combat specialized unit, set up over 12 inches away, and then you cannot be declared as the target of a charge. In your coming turn, you will then move and charge. Move, advance, and charge with Purestrain Genestealers. Or you can do any of the other rapid ingress shenanigans. Have an extra unit appear on an objective out of line of sight that can't be shot. Even if the initial unit there was killed, it stays as your objective. Deep strike near neophytes. Have some aberrants pop up behind them. Then if the enemy is going to charge your neophytes, you will heroically intervene with the aberrants. It's like the big brother just shows up to tell the enemy that they shouldn't try it. You can use this stratagem in any phase, but it makes the most sense for planning if it's done in the enemy movement phase. That is also when they're most likely to remove your tokens. Otherwise, if they did it in a consolidation move at the end of their fight phase, we have to go through all of your turn, in which case you might want to deep strike the unit, and then get through to the enemy turn before you can use the cult ambush marker. You only use these cult ambush markers in the enemy movement phase, at the end of their reinforcement step. Hypermetabolic Vigor can be useful. An aberrant, biophagus, or Purestrain unit that hasn't fought yet can pile in and consolidate 6 inches instead of 3 inches, and you don't have to end your move closer to the closest enemy model, as long as you end as close as possible to the closest enemy unit. This can allow you to wrap around a unit, either to stop them from escaping or to get more attacks in, and you pile in 6 inches rather than 3 inches. As it also applies to the consolidation move, if the enemy had done something to make an objective sticky and moved away from it, blocking you from getting to that objective, you could charge them and then move 6 inches onto the objective, kill the enemy and reach it. Or you can go really far using this stratagem. If you were infiltrating with a Purestrain and an aberrant unit, charge the same enemy, perhaps a screen that's stopping you from getting to more vulnerable enemies. If the Purestrain Genestealers can destroy it, and they can kill most screens, any disposable unit that's in the way, then use Hypermetabolic Vigor on the aberrants. They can pile in towards the closest enemy unit, which should be the one you initially wanted to kill. They were eligible to fight at the start of the fight phase, so they're allowed to pile in. I think I've used this stratagem once. It was a good use, and it let me destroy an extra unit, but it has very limited scope of use. It's not something you're going, yeah, I can just do that casually, or it's not something you're planning a whole event around. Biohorror Revelation is not going to get used. At the start of your opponent's shooting phase, before they picked any of their targets, an aberrant, biophagus, or Purestrain unit can use this, and until the end of the phase, each time an enemy unit within 9 inches is selected to shoot, it has to take a leadership test, not a battle shock test, just a leadership test, subtracting 1 from the result. If it's failed, then any time they try and shoot your unit that is the scary unit, then they're -1 to hit. And it's only -1 to hit if they're targeting that scary unit. If they shoot something else, no penalty. So don't use this. This stratagem would have been better if it caused battle shock tests, or it just gave stealth to your unit. Then we don't have this, oh well, we get stealth if the enemy unit fails their leadership test. Or if it made the enemies -1 to hit regardless of the target they're going for. Then a unit could rush forward and be scary and protect your other units in your army. But you can just ignore this stratagem. You can't ignore Stimulated Biosurge. That is a good stratagem. An aberrant, biophagus, or Purestrain Genestealer unit from your army that has yet to charge gets +1 to the charge roll if they choose to charge their closest target. And you get an additional +1 if you include more units as your charge target. It's to a maximum of +3. So that is at least another +1 to the charge from reserves or Cult Ambush Deep Strike, and you can set up your unit to be like 9 inches away to charge 2 units, which could be the remnants of 2 enemy units or a unit near a lone operative. Now you have +3 to the charge, +2 from this stratagem, and another +1 from the detachment rule. So your charge is 2d6 plus 3 inches. Basically a 6-inch charge. And this doesn't have to be used from reserves. It makes for a good first turn charge stratagem. But aside from stimulated Biosurge, Gene Twisted Muscle if the enemy has some monsters and vehicles, Saintly Paroxysm if the enemy kills you in combat, get used to the core stratagems, grenades, heroic intervention especially, rapid ingress, and epic challenge to put your Abominant and Patriarch on assassination duty. When shenanigans and exploits around stratagems are often how the Genestealer Cult live and die, and live again, and continue living while our enemies die and stay dead, I don't think this detachment has enough clever tactics, at least from the stratagem point of view. But I've explained how to use the Biosanctic Brood Surge stratagems, but usually I find that by battle round 3, I have 4 or 5 command points and I'm ready to go for another round of grenades. Now let's look at some army lists and I'll explain more of the tactics of this detachment and how I play it. At 1000 points, you can really focus on the detachment units. So here's an army list that's 1000 points. A Patriarch with Biomorph Adaptation, a unit of 10 Purestrains, a unit of 5 Purestrains, an Abominant with Predatory Instincts so they can infiltrate, 5 Aberrants to infiltrate with them, an Abominant with Mutagenic Regeneration, a Biophagus, 10 Metamorphs, 10 Neophytes, and an Achilles Ridge-Runner. So we have an Abominant, an Aberrant unit, 10 Purestrains, 5 Purestrains, and the Patriarch all infiltrating. I would have had more Purestrains, but under the 2025-2026 mission deck, at 1000 points, you have a maximum of 2 of each unit. The Neophytes start on the home objective and use a plan generations in the making to control your home objective for hopefully the rest of the game, and then they'll move forward. The Ridge Runner can stay on the home, or it could scout up and then move up to support your infiltrating units. And then there's the Abominant. It depends on if the mission requires the home objective. Linchpin very much does. Hidden Supplies does not. The Metamorphs are like a second wave. They can't scout because the Biophagus is part of the unit and not every model in that unit has scout, but they can move quickly to get to the enemy, via the objectives in the middle of the board. They could complete secondary missions on their way. So should the Neophytes, and the Ridge Runner could as well if their crossfire bonus is not required. While the lone Abominant with Mutagenic Regeneration is there to turn up, maybe do an action, but really they want to charge and smash something. Because you don't need to be leading a unit to use the Mutagenic Regeneration enhancement, I hope to get a wound back at some point. There's not too many enemy units at 1000 points that can take out a Toughness 6 5 wound with 5 up Feel No Pain unit. They won't get the Chosen One ability, but if they die in combat, there's Saintly Paroxysm, then we can regenerate using Regeneration Gene Mass, and if the enemy takes a few wounds off us again, then we can get 1 or 2 back with the Mutagenic Regeneration enhancement. Really they rapid ingress and then move and smash. Because they're not getting the detachment bonus, so they won't get +1 on their charge rolls, making a charge from Deep Strike kind of risky. 9 inches is not great. With the 6 resurgence points I have, I'll spend 2 on the 5 Purestrains. They're very likely to die first, and then bring back either the Aberrants, or the Metamorphs, or the 10 Neophytes. And I'd only bring back the Neophytes if the Metamorphs don't look like they'll die very soon, and I really need another unit to come back quickly. The Aberrants I bring back the least because as attrition starts kicking in, I need another unit to complete missions and hold objectives. 5 Aberrant models can be easily outscored on objective control, but it can be very upsetting for your enemy who's just gotten through some Aberrants to find out there's even more Aberrants. Yeah, they could turn up and do some secondary missions and be a roadblock for the enemy again, although the Ridge Runner and the Lone Abominant can also complete secondary missions, but if the Neophytes died too quickly, I would bring them back. Sticky objectives is very useful if you can take out the enemy units, so they only have a few units, and you can keep controlling objectives while they're scrambling around to take them. The 2000 point army list is a natural expansion of this previous army list, with more of the tactics that I've already mentioned in this video. For those of you who cannot read English or who do not like looking at screens, this army list contains a Patriarch with the Biomorph Adaptation, 10 Purestrains, 5 Purestrains, another 5 Purestrains, a Biophagus with Predatory Instincts, 10 Aberrants, a Primus, 10 Acolytes with Mining Tools and Auto Pistols, 10 Metamorphs with an Icon and Hand Flamers, a Goliath Truck, an Abominant, 5 Aberrants, another Abominant and 5 more Aberrants, a Sanctus, 2 squads of 10 neophytes, a ridge runner, and another separate unit of a ridge runner. That is 1,995 points. The 2,000 point army looks a bit more general Genestealer Cult, but with more aberrants than normal. Usually there are none, so any amount would be more than normal, but there's also more Purestrain Genestealers than before. 10 Purestrains with the Patriarch, 2 squads of 5 Purestrains to act as screens to stop your infiltrating units getting charged so soon. They do actions, or rather, they die, come back with Cult Ambush, and then they do more actions. Or they can advance and charge. Either way, whatever you need at the moment. The unit of 10 Purestrains is too many Resurgence points to be worth it, and you don't get the Patriarch back. The Biophagus with the Predatory Instincts enhancement that lets him infiltrate will infiltrate whichever unit the enemy dislikes the most, the Mining Tool Acolytes, the Metamorphs, or 10 Aberrants. And the Primus would join the Acolytes or the Metamorphs, usually the Acolytes, with the Aberrants infiltrating and the Metamorphs going in the truck, which can then scout as it's a dedicated transport and every model inside has scout. I could double up with the Primus and Biophagus in the Acolyte squad, while the Aberrants are then in the truck and the Metamorphs are on foot scouting, but 2 characters in one unit is usually too many eggs in one basket. My default is the Biophagus is with the Aberrants infiltrating so we can get that wall of muscle into the enemy as soon as possible, screened of course by Purestrain Genestealers. The Metamorphs go in the truck so that when they get out, and the truck shoots something, then they shoot something, they can reroll the wound rolls on their auto-hitting hand flamers, and also scout, while the Primus is with the Acolytes. The Acolytes will start on the home objective, then spread out to cover the central objective, and also that home objective, so that in your turn 2, you get to roll 2 dice to try and generate an extra command point. You roll for each objective marker, and you max out at 1 command point, as that is the 1 extra command point you can have per battle round. In turn 3, they want to get into combat. Neophytes will start on the home objective just to use a plan generations in the making, and then they'll move off to other objectives, whichever one the Acolytes didn't move towards, or they can stay there if you need to screen out the home objective. It depends if the enemy has lots of reserves waiting, and the ability to use a stratagem or some such to leave and return. I know this is a combat detachment, and if you want to transport in a combat detachment, the Rock Grinder is a good choice, as that can charge into combat with the unit that just disembarked, but I need the truck because the truck can fit 10 models. Rock Grinder caps out at 6. And why have a Primus? People aren't often taking a Primus. Well, the Primus gives +1 to hit to their unit, so Acolytes with Mining Tools hitting on a 2+, or Metamorphs hitting on a 2+, and the Primus can redeploy units, and when you redeploy units, they can continue to infiltrate. So the first thing I deploy is 10 Purestrains and the Patriarch, and they cover a whole line in no man's land and prevent enemy infiltrators. And then, after deployment, redeploy them to a safe place behind a screen of 5 Purestrains. You could also redeploy those 5 Purestrains, and maybe consider a refused flank. Oh, the enemy is concentrated in one area, let's just go the entire other side, and we'll come round and attack their more vulnerable flank. The Achilles Ridge Runners have a heavy mortar and a spotter. The spotter to improve the ballistic skill, which then offsets the -1 to hit from firing indirectly. But using mortars, we can hit any enemy, like anywhere on the board, and reach them to give that crossfire bonus to wherever those infiltrating units have ended up. They get into combat, now their armor penetration is an extra 1. Because how long does crossfire last?
I thought Ridge Runner was only for the shooting phase.
No. If you look again at the Ridge Runner, then it's until the end of the turn. That changed from the index to the codex. It's why the Ridge Runner is so much better than like the Eldar version, if you look at it.
Oh no, end of the turn! Oh, goodness gracious. That makes Biosanctic so much better too, because you got AP3 on the Aberrants.
You use the mortars, and because of so much of your stuff is infiltrating, like the Genestealers, like one of the Aberrant units with enhancement,
right?
You're behind walls immediately. But the mortars will keep giving you that extra AP. AP3 Aberrants and Genestealers. That is how Crossfire helps the combat units. Crossfire lasts until the end of the turn, not the end of the phase. The Sanctus with a knife maybe can kill some infiltrating units if they got there first and then we had to deploy elsewhere. You can go stab them. You get critical wounds on a 3+. But more importantly, with a knife you cannot be hurt by Overwatch, so as you're running between objectives or moving to get into a particular zone of the board to score a secondary mission, you're not getting shot down in the process. If I had more points, I would have a Reductor Saboteur whose planted explosive is a concern for enemies that want to move closer to our infiltrating units in the first turn, either because they want to shoot them or to charge them, but at the very least, there should be fewer of them doing so if they've stepped on a mine. Then she would do the same thing that the Sanctus is going to do in the list, which the Neophytes are doing in the list: complete secondary missions, stand on objectives, and score primary missions. The 2 lots of 5 Aberrants with Abominant are basically delivery methods for the Abominant. At least one wants to arrive from reserves and multi-charge with Stimulated Biosurge. The other unit can be on the board to counter enemies that escape the Genestealer jail, or be in reserves and rapid ingress. They are a good unit to deploy on the board and then redeploy into reserves as need be with the Primus, either to a better place in your deployment zone or to move into reserves. So the plan: go first and win. Many players prefer to go second because it's easier to score in the final turn and you don't have to expose your units first. But not for us in the Biosanctic Brood Surge. We want to get in there! With some exceptions for asymmetric missions and some crusade missions, in 10th edition of 40k, you don't know who's going first until you each roll a dice, and the player whose dice roll is higher has to go first. So deploy as if you were going second. Have your units hidden behind terrain that blocks line of sight so you don't get shot in the first turn. Use the small Purestrain units to block the enemy combat units getting to your Aberrants or Patriarch and neutering their damage output. And remember that the character that infiltrates with predatory instincts can heroically intervene for free. If you can kill the enemy in their turn, then you have a cleaner run at the enemy deployment zone. Units that are used to defeat enemy screening units like Kroot or Assault Intercessors will not do so well as Aberrants barrel into them. Maybe they could kill the 5 Purestrain Genestealers, but they can't take down the Aberrants, and the Aberrants can take them down, as long as you can kill them with all your extra attacks from the detachment rule. If not, don't charge. We can't fall back and charge, and you don't want to lose that first turn by being locked in combat. When we get to go, the Aberrants and the Purestrains charge enemy screening units, the Purestrains kill that screening unit, and with Hypermetabolic Vigor, the Aberrants can get into the juicier units behind, as long as the Purestrains utterly destroy the screen. If that screen was a Rhino, you may struggle a bit more and have to use your 1 command point to get +1 to wound. If you can get a 2nd command point from the Acolytes, assuming you went second because no one controls the objectives at the start of the first turn, and that is when, if you were going first, you would try and generate a command point on an objective you own, but you don't own it if you go first until the end of the phase, and claimed for the cult is at the start of the command phase. Or maybe you do it the other way around. Have the Aberrant smash the Rhino and use Hypermetabolic Vigor to get the Purestrains into something behind, or the unit that was just knocked out of the Rhino. What I'm trying to do is hold the enemy back in their deployment zones. Use Purestrain Genestealers to kill the enemy units that score victory points by holding primary missions and completing secondary missions, and have sticky objectives, the equivalent of the Neophytes. Chaos Cultists, Kroot Carnivore Squads, Cadians, Battle Sisters, or against Imperial Agents, Sisters of Battle Squads. Use the infiltrating Aberrants and a second wave of deep striking units to hold up enemy tanks that can't fall back and shoot, and destroy the enemy units that have lots of infantry killing attacks. Gladiator Reapers, Crisis Battlesuits with Flamers so that the enemy cannot kill our own point scoring units. If you can hold back the enemy for 3 rounds, you will win the game. You have scored lots of points in the first 3 rounds, they have not. But usually you can only keep them back for 2 rounds, and then they get out and start scoring more victory points. Let's make sure that when that happens, they can't kill our Neophytes and score lots of victory points to outscore us at the end, as long as we've gotten rid of their units that they use to score missions. And as we are killed, small units of Purestrains can come back for mission completing for 2 resurgence points, while the rest of our army continues to hold up the enemy. That's the detachment, that's the army, those are the tactics. This is all free advice, so please click subscribe. There is more to come and you don't want to miss it. January will continue. Have a great day of 40k.